Hello there, this is Agri Talk right here on KTN Farmers TV. My name is Calvin Yakundi, and today we'll be basically talking about raising awareness on the need to increase investment in sanitary and phytosanitary capacity and build compliance of growers, aggregators, processors, and distributors. And joining us to discuss this is Martha Bianyema, who is a food safety expert, and she is also a lead party at USDA Land or Lakes Venture 37. And she's here to get us right into this and to discuss this topic. Welcome.
Thank you, Kelvin.
All right. Okay, let us just start off by you just explaining to us what Land or Lakes Ventures does.
Land O'Lakes Venture 37 is a not-for-profit. We work worldwide to improve livelihoods through agriculture. We are largely a US government-funded program, providing development assistance to governments, to private sector entities in various aspects of agriculture and agribusiness. But we are affiliated to our business, US Global Business, which is called Land O'Lakes Inc. Land O'Lakes Inc. is a Fortune 200 agribusiness entity in the United States. It's engaged in inputs, livestock, dairy, and animal feed. It has a number of agribusiness activities and investments in the United States and worldwide. So we are affiliated to it. So our development assistance is a not-for-profit, but we are affiliated to our agribusiness parent company, and from where we always tap volunteers to bring a lot of expertise in the work that we do. So here in Kenya, I am representing Land O'Lakes Venture 37 on a regional program that's funded by the United States Department of Agriculture. That's equivalent to the Minister of Agriculture in any country.
Oh, wow.
So the program is working to unlock trade in the East African community, safe trade in food and agriculture. As you know, the East African community is a common market. Being a common market means that it has harmonized tariffs, so most of the products grown or wholly produced in the region can be traded tariff-free. But it also means that within this common market, they have common rules, regulations, and guidelines. So they also have common regulations and rules on how to apply regulations or measures for plant health, animal health, and food safety risks that are associated with the products we trade regionally. So our program aims at supporting the East African community efforts to develop or establish a seamless regulatory system that can facilitate trade, remove bottlenecks that are regulatory in nature, but also make our products competitive across the ESC bloc, so that when we produce a product, it's easily marketed here in the region, but it's also competitive in other markets outside the ESC bloc. So that's the work we are doing now.
All right. And you've spoken about the projects that you are currently doing or you've started. How did it start?
Well, when the program started within a framework of US government and East African community assistance, technical assistance, they have an agreement, a framework through which the US government provides assistance to the East African community partner states. Now, this sanitary and phytosanitary sector, which sanitary and phytosanitary means food hygiene, plant health, it means human health, plant health, and animal health. It's an interesting sector because it is emerging out of a trade agreement that was negotiated in 1995 when under the World Trade Organization. It's called the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement. So that agreement was committing all the members of the WTO to conform to certain governance principles in the way they apply regulations to manage human health, risks transmitted through food and agricultural products, which risks can affect human health, plant health, or animal health. Because before it was negotiated, what had been realized then in the international trading system is that whereas countries were increasingly removing tariffs and taxes, the countries were resorting to non-tariff measures like regulations for plants, regulations for animals, to restrict entry of other countries' products. So now they start in 1995, over a period of time, prior to 1995, over a period of like 3 years, and negotiated new rules and principles to govern the way they apply these regulations.
Yes.
And they culminated into an agreement that was signed in 1995, which is the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement. Now, under that agreement, there is a provision which obliges developed countries provide assistance to developing countries. And mind you, this is just one of the less contentious. It's not a. This is one of the less contentious or non-contentious agreements under the WTO, because everybody wants to trade safely. Everybody doesn't want to destroy their plants because that destroys your food security.
Yes.
Nobody wants to destroy their animals because that would destroy your food security, and nobody wants to kill people through contaminated food.
Yes.
So it's not a contentious agreement. So there is a provision where developed countries should work with developing countries to develop appropriate capacity. So I think over time, developed countries or donors have also included it in the assistance framework that they offer to our countries.
Yes.
So U.S. government provides this assistance to the ESC partner states through that framework. So that's how it emerged. It emerged out of acknowledging that we've made progress as a common market.
Yes.
We've made progress as the East African community to trade freely and easily amongst each other. But we still have some way to go in terms of domesticating or implementing commitments we've made collectively. And the commitments they've made collectively in this sector is that they have an East African community legal framework on how to apply sanitary and phytosanitary regulations. So that framework, although it exists, implementation has varied across countries. Some countries, for political reasons, I won't name countries. I want to be politically right. I might annoy some countries. So some countries are good at implementing these systems.
Yes.
And aligning them, not just with the ESC commitments, but also with commitments in the international trading system. But some countries are not good at that. And we've been expanding the ESC and getting new members. So some countries have weak systems as a result. So when you have a weak regulatory system, when you have a weak system that is not applying these principles as they should, then trading with other countries that have applied them becomes very difficult. You compromise their status, you compromise even their ability to trade with other countries outside the ESC bloc.
Yes.
So we've been working with the countries to try and bridge those capacity challenges and help the countries to come closer to implementing them in a harmonious way, so that you remove regulatory bottlenecks, so that trading across borders becomes easy, and the ESC becomes a competitive bloc in the international trading system.
Yes.
So that's how we came about with this program.
Oh, wow, very insightful. And for example, the ESC, and the way you've really explained and said this is the regulations that have been put in place. What are some of the barriers that are making some other maybe countries not follow what has been decided throughout the ESC?
There is, in my understanding and my own experience, is that the reasons why countries don't implement these principles as they should vary. One is lack of competence within the institutions themselves, understanding understanding how to apply themselves properly. Because you see, the agreement gives you provisions and says, these are the principles, but you've got to translate those principles into systems at national level. You've got to have laws and regulations that are aligned with those principles. And it's not just having laws and regulations, you have to have systems implemented within the competent institutions and
Yes.
within the private sector that are aligned with those principles, regulations. So you find that many times the countries are varied. The countries which have not implemented them fully have lack competence in terms of translating those commitments into actual actions at national level. But in other times, we found that it's not just lack of competence, I mean inadequate competencies, it's also political will to invest adequately. Countries are not investing, and this really runs across. There is not enough investment in this sector. So that's why you find our exports failing. That's why you always find you hear of an import restriction. European Union has stopped taking our produce, or they have come up with a new regulation conditions that are high cost and we can't afford them as industry. It's because we haven't invested adequately, and these investments must come from the government and from the industry. Yeah.
And speaking of contamination, because that's one of the main, you can't talk about food and don't speak about contamination, especially if it's being traded between different countries. So the issue of contamination, what has been some of the maybe resolutions or rules that have been put in place in East Africa to enable us to trade in a more sanitary way?
They're actually very elaborate. First of all, let me explain and say that these principles and have been applied in the development of international standards. In a lot of these risks that we want to manage, there is already consensus at international level, and our countries have been part of that consensus. In terms of what is the international standard that we should implement in order to manage this risk and remove contamination from our food supply chain. And these standards have been developed under a body that is called Codex Alimentarius, which is hosted by the FAO. And our own countries are members of the Codex Alimentarius.
Yes.
They've been meeting regularly. They are on the expert panels. They are in the technical committees. And they are part of this architecture of the international standards that can prevent contamination of our food supply chains.
Yes.
So there is consensus. And the standards are there. And the tools are there. So they just have to be implemented. Yeah.
And also, still on that, you find that, for example, in our country, when we export plants or fruits outside, you find that the way we make sure that they look good, they are clean, is even better than the way we package it when we are selling, maybe when we are taking it to Uganda, when we are taking it to Tanzania. So what will make us use these international standards in the local market? Because you find that the international market, we are really making sure that we are doing the best. We are packaging it the best. We are picking the best fruits, the best plants, but leaving the bad ones to our local market.
It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. You're very right, Kelvin, because what we produce for consumption outside our countries should be same standard as what we produce for our own citizens. But why is that? Well, in the export markets that we target, they are more conscious about the need to ensure safety for their citizens. So they will ensure the international standards are implemented. They will put a lens on us. They will audit us regularly. They will give conditions before we can access their markets. So before you place a food on their market, they have conditions to ensure that that food is not going to harm their citizens, or if it's a plant or an animal product, it's not going to harm the animals or plants. So they have, like I said, they have implemented international standards better than us. The problem with us, like I said, is that we have not invested adequately. Political will varies in our countries, and our priorities vary. And until we put the issues we are talking about, plant health, animal health, and human health, food safety, among our top priorities, and then invest adequately. And when I talk of investments, I mean the infrastructure that enables you to have like food hygiene, like in the wet markets we have. I would love to see, and I thought that having had COVID, there would be a difference in our wet markets. I would think that the wet markets now would be more hygienic, would have clean water, would have people sanitation protocols, cleaning the markets regularly, and people observing hygiene. I would have imagined that these protocols would now be part of our normal behavior. But we still have some way to
Yes.
go. So I mean, we need to invest in that infrastructure, enabling infrastructure. But most important, and what's not visible, we need to invest in our regulatory frameworks. In our regulatory frameworks, that means that we must have regulatory controls that are effective and not constraining business. When you are putting in place this regulatory control, you're balancing your public health objective and also the need to sustain businesses. You can't put there conditions that are going to put people out of business, for example. You must put there conditions that are easy to implement. You can't ask a vendor in a market to have an infrastructure they can't afford. You have to have public facilities which can serve everybody, like public washrooms, public toilets, which all of them can use. So until a time when we start recognizing that we need to invest adequately back home in infrastructure, enabling infrastructure, and regulation, a regulatory framework that's business friendly, we are going to continue not just having problems in export markets with our exports, but even back home, we'll be having incidents. You always hear incidents of people who have become ill from contaminated food. You always hear of people who have been poisoned as a result of contaminated beverages. Those things continue happening. So
Yes.
we must comply with the constitutional provision to protect our citizens and invest adequately in those areas. Yeah.
And you've spoken about COVID-19, and COVID came and almost affected every sector. So if you look at this sector of safety, human health, plant health, before COVID and after COVID, is it worse
Yeah,
or?
I haven't been there. We haven't done the analysis yet. I hope we'll have a time to do it. But let me just say one thing, though, that this COVID-19 virus, remember, there was talk that it was the virus was first observed in wildlife meat. It was from wildlife, then transmitted to humans. So that's a zoonotic virus, which means that it was transmitted from animals to humans through food. Now, for me, that was an important indicator. And I would have imagined that our countries would have seen a more One Health approach, where the animal health experts are working with the public health specialists, are working with the standards bureaus, are working across sectors to have actions that are going to prevent animal to human or human to human infections or contamination through food, transmission of risks through food. I would have loved to see these actions in the markets I've been talking about. I would have loved to see these actions in our street food, where majority of the people have their meals. I would have liked to see these actions in our public health eating places, public eating places. I would have loved to see more self-regulations, self-regulation efforts, like having the people themselves who are selling the food saying that we have the protocols that the government has provided, the guidance, and we are working together to put in place an enabling infrastructure and a healthy working environment. But I think our efforts are still very much low. We have been working hard to see that we've stopped the human-to-human transmission of the virus, masking, wash hands, but we have not worked hard enough to ensure that we don't have cross contamination through poor hygiene in our facilities, poor environmental hygiene, poor transportation habits, behaviors, and generally, food consumption behaviors that are transmitting, that are increasing the contamination cases in our countries. So I think that more than just protecting human to human health transmission, we should have done more. And there's still room for us to do more to clean up our environment and ensure that the food which is produced and consumed in our communities is hygienic and is safe for human consumption. Yeah.
And do you think the weather is a contributor into this?
Climate change?
Yes.
Yes, we've been saying climate change, and there is evidence. There is evidence to show that because of climate change, because of changing weather patterns, the ecosystem has changed. Bacteria, viruses are live organisms.
Yes.
They have mechanisms to protect themselves. When the climate changes, they also protect themselves, and they change from one form to another. Sometimes a more resistant form, a more resistant virus, a more resistant microbacterium that cannot be treated with existing treatments. Even pests, they are becoming more resilient to pesticides. They can't be treated with the same treatments. So that is why it's always good to have a regulatory system that is looking beyond what is existing and always looking at what is emerging and being proactive in managing these risks. And let me just give an example of Kenya. Just recently, Kenya has been reforming its food safety law, and I have been part of that process. And it's very encouraging to see what Kenya has done, because it has come at a time when we are fighting the COVID-19 virus. So definitely, I think it has also been informed by those challenges, the emerging challenges. And the law is going to ensure that our regulatory system is more proactive in Kenya, that the regulators are working more together, and they are informed by science in the actions that they take, which science is looking at the risk and the and all the risk management options. I mean the level of the risk, whether it is low, medium, or high, and also risk management options, the various options that are there, and then providing that regulatory framework that is science-based. So I'm very encouraged by what has happened in Kenya and continues happening in Kenya, and it's lesson for all the other countries. We are, in our program, we keep taking these lessons to other countries, and that helps in a way.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We have to go for a short break, and we've been talking to Martha Byanyima, and she's been giving us insights into what we need to do in order to improve human health, plant health, and also sanitary all over the East Africa. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back with more. Welcome back. This is Agri Talk. My name is Kelvin Nyakundi, and today we have Martha Byanyima here, and she is here to explain to us more about how we need to maintain human health, plant health, and also trade between East Africa and maintain the sanitary regulations that we have within East Africa. Welcome back.
Thank you, Kelvin.
All right. So now to the individual, the human being, because all these things are being done by people. So as an individual, what does one need to do in order to make sure that at least you yourself are contributing into this?
That's an interesting question, Kelvin. One of the things that I have over the years realized is a challenge, is that we don't have a food safety culture. Our food safety culture here within the ESC is lacking. And when I talk about food safety culture, is we, the citizens ourselves, should be demanding certain standards of food hygiene and certain standards of environmental health. This is going to ensure that our food is not contaminated. So I think one of the things we have to do diligently and deliberately is promote a food safety culture in our countries and in our region. Yeah.
And speaking of building compliance of growers, the distributors, explain to us how this can happen so that at least they also come in and contribute to this.
Okay. I think that actually the processors, for example, as you know, Kenya is a processing hub in the region. It's a manufacturing hub.
Yes.
It has many of the food manufacturing companies are based here. So the companies, the food processing companies, know exactly what they need to do to manage these risks in their supply chain and provide a safe product on the market. They do this through applying what we usually call voluntary standards, beyond the standards that, for example, Kenya Bureau of Standards puts in place for manufacturers. They also put in place voluntary standards which are audited by third parties. These third parties are auditing companies, international auditing companies like Bureau Veritas, like SGS, because the buyers who buy from them in the outside world don't trust our governments. So even when you have a Kenya Bureau of Standards certification, they are like, that's not enough. You have to have a certification we trust. So those certifications are in the domain of international companies like SGS, like Bureau Veritas, like, those private standards are like the global gap standard that the horticulture industry uses to access export markets, like the BRC standard, British Retail Consortia standard, that we use for processed products, ISO 22000. There are so many, but they are audited by international companies. So at that level, there's no problem. They know what to do. They know how to comply with the Bureau of Standards, the national standards, and they know how to comply international standards that are in the private domain to provide assurance to their buyers. The greatest challenge we have is upstream. Upstream, the value chain, where you have smallholder producers, because they are the ones who dominate production. You have a few commercial farmers and you have your small producers. Those are the ones usually who don't have information on what practices must I have on my farm to be able to integrate and to have a safe food. So, and that is because our extension systems also have over time are not been effective. We have not invested adequately in our extension system, so we are not reaching upstream with the information and with the tools that the small producers need to be able to comply. So whenever you hear that our exports are failing, like horticulture produce, our interceptions and rejections are increasing, the weakness is upstream. The weakest link of the chain is the small grower, the small producer. So that is where we need to place efforts. We need to find a way, a mechanism of bringing them maybe as farmer groups and working with them to build the compliance that we need to implement good practices. And we must have national standards that reflect the real needs and challenges that these small producers are facing. And this must be in every supply chain, not only horticulture, because horticulture is an export crop,
Yes.
but it must also be in the food that we eat ordinarily. And that has to be an effort from the government, but working with the small producers themselves, so that as they build this compliance, they also integrate in the export supply chain and other market linkages regionally. So I think it is something that has to be deliberate on our part, and it's going to have a huge public investment, but it will be anchoring, also leveraging exporting companies, which are those ones who are up here processing for export, or you create that linkage and you leverage their resources to build a seamless system. So it's so doable, but it has to be deliberate. And it has to be the governments working very closely with the local governments. What I like about Kenya, you have a very good structure. You have the central government, you have the local governments. So they should be working together. Right now, what is worrying me is that local governments feel we are so powerful,
Yeah.
we have our money, we do things we want. So central government is losing control, but they shouldn't lose control of the regulatory system. Particularly in animal health, plant health, and food safety, central government must continue to guide the local government, because the counties, because for a long time, capacity is being built here in the central government. And you know, there's enormous resource here in Kenya. When you come to expertise in the institutions, oh, it's enormous. You have brilliant people, very well trained, and you have, you know, good laboratories. You have very good, you know, enabling infrastructure at central level. And I have seen that it also trickles down. The counties also do have something,
Yeah.
not to that level, but something. So for this regulatory system, it needs to be seamless. So I think central government should retain control, work closely with the local government, give control to the local counties, but guide it and give them the tools so that you apply it in the same way. Our food is produced in the counties, so we have to make that connection. Otherwise, we'll be having failures in trade that we could prevent from happening.
You've spoken about KEBS and how products go through KEBS and they get certified to be sold in the country, but also you've also spoken about when they go to international standards, they have again to be vetted. What is the reason for this?
You know, those are the emerging challenges I've been telling you about. You know, in developed countries, because they have a food safety culture, governments regulate, but the consumers demand more. They demand, they say, no, we don't trust the government can do it well.
Yeah.
Because of the failures they've had. You had the BSC crisis in meat in Europe, and they've had other crises in different. So they said, no, it's not enough. We want an oversight from an independent entity. So because of that awareness and demand, what you have there is private standards, standards in the private domain, which are more stricter than government regulations.
Yes.
So they also have developed a system, an oversight system over these standards, which is in the private sector. So you have third-party certification companies that oversee how these standards are implemented, private standards. So in the end, the one who is the market that wants to satisfy a housewife, like Sainsbury's, like Tesco, will have to comply to consumer demands and ask for that private standard and say, well, our consumers are demanding that beyond the regulations, you should comply with this standard. Their standards have even evolved. It's not only on human health, it's also on ethics. They say, oh no, we want to know where our food is coming from. Our workers treated fairly. So you have ethical standards there, private. And they are demanding, if a product is not labeled with an ethical product, a housewife doesn't select it, doesn't buy it. So fair trade, all those emerged out of consumer awareness and exercising their right to choice. Saying we are aware and we are making the choice and we are demanding. So the private standards are there to give them assurance. The certification firms are there to give them assurance that your demands are being met in this product, which is certified in this way. So because those standards evolved quite fast, quickly in the developed markets, now when they are buying from us, the same consumers say, okay, we demand this from our own producers. We will demand it also from those ones we are buying from in Africa. So we have no choice. If we want to enter their high premium markets, and they pay a premium, by the way, they pay when you have an ETI, ethical TI certification, the product is also capped higher. So it's an incentive for the producer to get into that market, just like it's an incentive for us. Our exporters get into that market, so they go look for global gap. They say, okay, we know we have Kenya standards, but global gap, come here. We want to put in place this system and certify us. Then they can access the high value markets. So that's how they have evolved.
All right. And speaking of this trading that you've talked about, we have storage. What are we doing wrong in storage?
It's the same thing. You know, when you talk about establishing a system, compliance on the supply chain, it's on every point of the supply chain. But the points of the supply chain have different risks. You have different risks as storage. So usually when you do your risk profiling, you'll see that you need greatest attention at the storage place. Because at that aggregation point, you've brought in a lot of produce from many areas. So when you don't pay attention at that critical point, there is a failure that can be disastrous, that can, when it's out of control, you affect so many people because it goes into different factories, different outlets, and then it spreads. So that is the problem. So that we have a problem with storage, no, is that we are not observing it as a critical point where we need to put our efforts and ensure that there is control, that the risks, the hazards are not, are managed effectively. Yeah.
And these things that we are talking about are really, really important. And you find that not very many people know about this. How can we create awareness to make sure that every person who is not only in the urban areas or even in the rural areas, because most of our produce come from those remote areas. So how do we make sure that those people in the remote areas also get this information, and so that they may comply with these standards?
Very good question. Yeah, I think that, for instance, let me congratulate Katie, and this is a very good initiative, and that's why I think it's value also for my time to create awareness. But this is just one channel.
Yes.
I don't think there are many people that there are other people who may not watch, television. So we must find other mechanisms, maybe through radio programs, maybe through, I don't know, other mechanisms at county level, those partnerships, and see that we create awareness, in a cross section of the citizens of this country, of our countries.
And in East Africa, what do you say is that main thing when it comes to sanitary that we have always been dealing with year in, year out, year in, year out, that needs to be cut in the bud?
You see, this area of sanitary and phytosanitary issues can be simple, but it can also be complex. And I think what we've done over time is that we've made it complex, and we've made it look like it's an export issue. And that's where we are missing the point. We need to make it an issue, a national issue, a public issue, make it a and that's where we're missing the point. Bring it on top of your high priority areas as a government, and then create an ecosystem where we can work together and promote a culture that is very conscious about animal health, plant health, and human health, and leverage resources, public, private, and manage them effectively. It's doable, but it has to be deliberate effort, and there has to be political leadership. Yeah.
And we have KEBS for the one that is regulating the standards and putting the standards.
It's
and
not
saying,
just KEBS,
yes,
by the way.
Yes.
Because for animal products, it's the Department of Veterinary Health. For pests, it's KEFIS, plant health. Public health, Ministry of Health also has a role in food safety. So it's many institutions. It's not just KEBS, yeah.
All right. And speaking about animal health, we've always had the issue of donkeys in Kenya. The donkeys being killed, and then their meat being sold. So have you as an institution gotten this?
Donkey meat. I hear donkey meat is actually a delicacy in some countries, in some foreign countries. It's fine if it was legalized and if donkeys were also slaughtered. They were also observing the same rules like meat, like cattle meat. But I think it's being done illegally. It's illegal trade, illegal harvesting of donkeys. So if it's illegally harvested, then they are bypassing the regulatory system, and you can't be sure whether it is safe. They are slaughtering it in a safe way, or whether the donkeys are free from disease that are transmittable to humans. So I think it's something that government needs to look at. I've heard, but I don't have any evidence.
Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, Kenya is a processing country, the way you've said clearly. So
it's. I mean, given other countries in the ESC, it has a strong manufacturing sector.
Yes. What can these other countries in the East African region copy from our country when it comes to processing?
Learn. They've got a lot to learn, and we've been doing it over time. Before I came into this job, I used to work with the Regional Economic Community, COMESA, and we spent a lot of time bringing countries together to learn from each other. So there's a lot that other countries have learned from Kenya, and I'm sure Kenya has got a lot that it has also learned from other countries. So it's an ongoing process, effort.
All right. And moving forward, as the East African community, and we have come up together and said, okay, this is what we want to do in sanitary and phytosanitary. Moving forward, where are we going as a community?
Well, the East African community is viewed as one of the fastest growing economic communities in the world, actually. So I think we are on the right track. But I think that one of the things that they still, if countries don't have the commitment, the collective responsibility we have as a regional bloc would fail. So it comes down to how extent which we are committed to these commitments we make at regional level to put them into action. Yes, we need also to say we've made this collective decision, let us match it with collective implementation. Yeah, individual implementation. Yeah.
All right. And the project that you talked about, is it going to be running because projects take some time and then they stop?
Yes, our program will run until 2024. But there are other programs that will be coming, and some of the things we are doing, we try to sustain them by anchoring them on private sector entities like associations, like the ESC itself, governments. So we think that the little efforts we shall put in place up to 2024 will be sustained through the structure we have created to sustain these efforts.
And by the end of this project, what would you have expected to achieve by the end of it?
We identified a few sectors which have general weaknesses in the systems and which have regional trade flows. The sectors we identified were like the grain sector, the feed material sector, the beef sector, the horticulture sector. So those sectors, we hope that by the time we finish, we'll have built a more robust system that is cuts across countries, and we'll have professionals whose skills we have sharpened. They already have skills, but just to give them common tools and sharpen their skills, and are working together in a seamless fashion, that a regulator here can call a regulator in Uganda and fix a problem before it becomes a trade barrier. That a regulator in Rwanda can pick a phone and talk to a regulator in Tanzania and solve an issue at their borders without it becoming a trade barrier. That is what we hope to have achieved by then. Yeah.
And also, speaking about the way you've talked about all this togetherness of the regulator in this place can call the other regulator in this other place, what do you think can we as a country do in order to maintain this sanitary and phytosanitary going forward? Because this issue has always been discussed, food safety, people keep on saying, oh, you need to do this, you need to do this. So what is that one thing that we need to do in order to make sure that at least by next year, we have solved at least some bit of it?
I think if you finalize this food safety coordination bill and turn it into law, it is quite transformative. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm praying that happens.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think we've come to the end of this discussion. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're most welcome, Kelvin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. We've learned a lot. I hope you've learned a lot about plant health, animal health, and the trade between East Africa and what we need to do in order to maintain food safety and sanitary and phytosanitary. And also, you as a distributor and producer of products, you've also learned something little about what you need to do. My name is Kelvin Nyakundi. We've been speaking to Martha Byanyima, who is a food security expert and food safety expert, and she is also here to talk to. She has been here talking to us about the projects they have and what they're going to do up to 2024, and what are some of the expectations she is expecting to achieve from all this that she has told us today. Let's meet next time, same place, same time. My name is Kelvin Nyakundi.